You know, now that we could field a full team of tan girls, does this mean that we could put the tan girl tag on Azur lane now? I mean, after all the events we've had recently, it wouldn't surprise me to see a PvP fleet like this running around right now. You know what? I'm putting the tag on it now. I wonder how many more that we're gonna have added to this game as the next year unfolds. Hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of tags missing here, and some of these aren't even right. Who's maintaining this on my side? Sandy, you had one job, and this ain't it. Great, well, I guess I gotta go and fix this now, don't I? Alright, today we're moving on to our first Eagle heavy cruiser, and that is USS Minneapolis. Now, Minneapolis arrived during the Fallen Wings event for Ian, which I believe is to be the next event rerun, so be ready when that event finally comes. Being an SR, does Minneapolis hold up to that rarity? Or is she somewhat like Prince Eugen in the sense that she is okay but fulfills a rather niche role? Well, let's take a look and see what makes Minneapolis who she really is. Starting off with her offensive stats, Minneapolis has a firepower stat that's about average when compared to her SR counterparts. Being a gun cruiser, she doesn't have a torpedo-based attack and uses a DD gun. Her reload sits at about average as well. So far she really isn't standing out too much. But let's see how she is on the survival side of things. Minneapolis boasts an average health pool, so Prinz and her glorious German engineering still have that advantage. In terms of anti-air, Minneapolis has a higher than average stat, so she'll do better in that regard. Something I have noticed for sure is that this is pretty much par the course for any USS ship in general. As for her evasion, Minneapolis has an average evasion for a heavy cruiser, and it is still relatively low, so expect her to take hits quite often. So right off the bat, her stats don't really make her seem like much of a star cruiser that many claim her to be. Even when we look at her level 120 stats, they stay about where I would believe they would be, about average. However, these stat boosts are still worth the resources for those last 20 levels. Minneapolis experiences a seemingly balanced increase in all of her stats. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. Looking at her equipment setups, limit breaking her fully grants a nice boost to her main gun, but the overall efficiency of which remains about average when compared to other heavy cruisers. As mentioned earlier, Minneapolis runs with a DD gun secondary instead of torpedoes and has about an average efficiency when compared to other gunboats that we do have. This also translates to Minneapolis gaining an additional gun mount instead of preloaded torpedoes upon limit breaking. As for her AA gun, she has a better efficiency than most ships, but again, that's about average among most Eagle heavy cruisers. It is kind of interesting that the Eagle faction has an innate advantage of good AA stats among their ships. And, well, I don't think I really need to explain that, since I'm more than certain everyone is well acquainted with a certain Eagle ship. Okay, ships. Sadly, Minneapolis' stat line does not do her any major favors in trying to stand out against the many really good heavy cruisers of Azur lane. So why does she stand out then? Well, like many characters, Minneapolis' skills are what allow her to maintain a strong presence in the battlefield, so let's dive into those particular skills. Minneapolis' first skill is Thrill of the Hunt, which is a quite unique skill. Every time Minneapolis gets a kill with her guns, she gains a buff that lasts about 12 seconds. This buff increases her firepower by up to 15% and her reload stat by up to 30%. What I like about this skill is that it allows her to be played aggressively and constantly benefit from her continued assault as long as there are enemies for her to kill in order for the skill to proc. Something that is important to mention here is that her skill does not stack on top of itself. If she already has the buff active and gets a kill within the 12-second timer, the timer is just reset, giving her another 12 seconds of the buff. The only major drawback to this skill is that in single target fights like boss fights, well, you might not see this skill proc at all. Now, Minneapolis' second skill is Dullahan, which is a powerful skill for her to have as a lot of things are happening when it procs. The first thing to mention about this skill is that Minneapolis' health needs to fall below 30% of her max. Upon activating this skill, Minneapolis regains up to 4% of her max health every 3 seconds for 16 seconds. But that is not all. For the rest of the fight, Minneapolis also takes up to a 10% less damage from all attacks. This type of damage reduction actually is kind of nice. It's not a lot, but it can still have a meaningful impact to her. Now, the only downsides to this skill is that it is a once per battle skill, meaning that once it's been activated, it'll never happen again. And also, during her 16 seconds of healing, Minneapolis' speed is reduced by 2 points. Now this can slow down your fleet quite a bit, but is easily countered by using the beaver badge on that fleet. What I love about this skill the most is that it is a recovery skill. One of the biggest issues I have with heavy cruisers is that their evasion is incredibly low, so they're likely to be hit constantly in combat. Low health heavy cruisers can drop pretty quickly in combat if there is no one to account for this weakness. This is a part of the reason why people use Portland Retrofit or Prinz Eugen. Their higher health pools and overall tankiness allow them to survive significantly longer than a lot of ships. Now, should health be an issue, Minneapolis has the advantage of recovering some of that health back. This skill, along with her first skill, are pretty good bargaining chips for her to be a part of everyone's fleet. But now comes the major question: boss or mob fleet vanguard? Well, in my opinion, she's way better designed for a mob fleet vanguard. During boss fights, you'll likely be facing one enemy aside from the occasional additional spawns. As such, Minneapolis will not be able to proc her offensive skill as it relies on scoring a kill. However, her survival skill can still help in boss fights as she'll be able to stay alive longer with that recovery. Since mob fleets have an abundance of enemies, she'll have an easy time acquiring the buff and keeping it active for a long period of time. The recovery skill can also help significantly if you're trying to be oil efficient, as she makes for a great solo vanguard member. Now at this point, there is one thing I do want to mention in regards to her versus other good heavy cruisers. Now, it's perfectly fine that people can compare them against each other, but in my opinion, I think that is not the best idea. For example, let's look at three of the frontrunners that I use often: Portland Retrofit, Mogami Retrofit, and Minneapolis. Each of these characters have quite some differences, but they all do excel exceptionally well. But each of the three of them must fulfill a specific role and do decently at the others. All of them can at least decently put out some good damage, they all have decent health pools, and for the most part, pretty good skills. Now, I'll talk about Mogami and Portland in their own video, but I'll at least mention the roles that they have here along with Minis. Now, for those wondering what I mean by the long swordy runner, assume you're trying the defeat all enemies challenge on a mission. In the early game, this isn't a major thing, as you'll have ammo supply as well as fewer fights than late game missions. But once you start hitting the later missions, you'll have to deal with the half damage debuff. Since you can't kill enemies as quickly, you'll take more damage from your mob fleets. High health characters and healers can help mitigate this problem, but characters with recovery skills can make these runs a lot easier to do. Minneapolis' recovery skill allows her to stay in the fight without having to worry too much about health pool. Complement her recovery skill with a healer, and you'll have a heavy cruiser that is pretty hard to sink, but not as hard as the glorious German engineering of Prinz Eugen. Now, usually when I run Minneapolis, I give her both the beaver badge and the powered evasion auxiliary, as the high evasion complements her overall build really well. The beaver badge helps to counter the speed loss from Dullahan, and the overall evasion boost makes her even harder to sink than she already is. So next time you're working to clear all enemy fleets in an encounter, Minneapolis is your ship girl for that. As I might have mentioned already, she makes an excellent soloist in a 1-1 fleet if you're wanting to be efficient with your oil. She may cost more as an SR, but the bonuses she brings can make up for it if you're working with her. I do constantly use her in my 1-1 mob fleet and pair her with a strong battleship or battle cruiser. Overall, Minneapolis may not have the jaw-dropping stat line, but her skills do more than enough to make her stand out as a really solid mob fleet vanguard member. She's capable of being aggressive with her skill while also being able to stay in the fight. As for synergies, you can definitely pair her with a healer to keep her health high for the most fights. You could also rely on Illustrious and/or Eldridge to help her when she gets in a tight spot. However, Minneapolis is basically a lone wolf character and can be paired with just about anyone. All in all, Minneapolis is a fantastic heavy cruiser that is worth acquiring and leveling her up. It would be in one's best interest to max out her skills, as she could prove to have a major role in long sortie runs. Minneapolis easily fits with her rarity with how unique and effective her skills are. So the next time Fallen Wings comes around, make sure everyone takes their time to try and tame this lovely cruiser. And that will be all for Minneapolis. Hope you all enjoyed and that this will help you in your future sorties. As I usually do, here's the majority of the list that will be covered in the future. If you see a ship girl that I have not covered and that is not on the list, then feel free to let me know and I'll add her. Up next is Hood, and I've got plenty of things to say about her. Now, whether you are a regular viewer or a patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys all again real soon.